Dr. Girard, actually, we're wanting to congratulate her. She won the 2024 Alberta Vet Medical Association Young Veterinarian of the Year Award for her expertise in poultry medicine and animal welfare, as well as her dedication to education and engagement of new and aspiring veterinarians, and her passion for providing exemplary service and to producers. She's a highly sought after speaker and instructor. Community and teamwork are foundational to her career and the joy that she feels every day on the job. Teryn got her education, her first couple of degrees at the U of A, and then her vet degree at U of C. So she's completely unbiased, as anyone in Red Deer is. She specialized in poultry ethology and animal welfare. She's won numerous teaching and industry awards, including Canadian Poultry Top 4 under 40. And in addition to performing swine and poultry veterinary medicine, Teryn enjoys presenting at poultry conference and small flock workshops, in addition to teaching at both the University of Calgary and the University of Alberta. And she will be available for Slido questions as well. So let's welcome Dr. Teryn Girard.
Quite the bio. Can you guys hear me? Now, can you hear me? Okay, you guys hear me now? Cool. Okay, well, thanks for having me out here to talk again, Western Poultry Conference, and thanks to everybody for being here. We're going to talk about top 10 tricks of successful vaccination. This will apply to whatever kind of poultry you run, whether it's broilers, turkeys, broiler breeders, or layers. And if you have questions about how we can apply it specifically to your farm, we can talk about it. So the first reason about this whole presentation is, why do we vaccinate poultry? So the first reason would be you want to prevent and reduce disease in your flock. So that means potentially preventing cellulitis in broilers, preventing E. coli infections in turkeys, or preventing any kind of egg drop or decreases in egg production for your layers or breeders. If you have breeders, such as broiler breeders in Alberta, then you want to be focusing on providing maternal antibodies to broilers as well. So we hyperimmunize the breeders so that the broilers have a really good start. And we'll come back to that. So for types of vaccine in poultry, there's going to be either hatchery applied or applied at the farm. If we're talking about the hatchery, we're going to be talking about in ovo or in the egg, subcutaneous, so under the skin, or a spray. But what we will be focusing on today is actually applied at the farm. So applied at the farm, you're going to talk about whether it's going to be a modified live vaccine or an inactivated or a killed vaccine. An inactivated or killed will mean the same thing for this presentation. For the modified live vaccine, those are either given through the drinking water or through a spray. In the inactivated or killed vaccines, those have to be injected. So the first tip that we're going to talk about today is know what you're working with. So are your birds currently healthy? If you're a turkey producer in this room, you know we don't vaccinate sick birds because it just makes them more sick. And it's the same thing with layers and chickens and broiler breeders. Make sure your birds are healthy. If they're not healthy, call your vet and figure out how to adjust your vaccination schedule to give your birds time to feel better before you vaccinate them. Is the vaccine modified live or killed? You want to know this, and we're going to go into depth about why this is important. But the way you handle these vaccines based on if they're live or killed are really important. How do you need to prepare? And should this vaccine be boosted, which means given more than once? And so that could be in the layer barn. It can be in the broiler barn after you've had your chicks. So we'll come back to that too. So modified live vaccines contain live pathogens, and that can be a virus or a bacteria. Because they're live, that means that you can kill it. So any incorrect handling will kill the vaccines, and vaccines have different levels of vulnerability. And the bronchitis vaccine is quite vulnerable, where something like the E. coli vaccine is less vulnerable. But because they're live, if you do something wrong, you reduce the efficacy or how much you're going to get out of that vaccine. Live vaccines are given through a course spray or through the drinking water, and they give you short-lived immunity. So think 4 to 6 weeks, not very long, okay? If you want long-term immunity, you need to be thinking about applying them more, so boosting them or giving a killed vaccine. Now, the killed vaccines don't have a live pathogen, so those birds are not actually seeing a live disease, but it's giving them long-term immunity. So in the layer case or the breeder case, when you inject birds, you should have immunity through the whole laying cycle then. Vaccines for these are often viruses, but it can include salmonella as well. And these require an injection. And then the injection is usually in the breast muscle. It can also be in the neck or the leg, but I recommend the breast muscle as that's the easiest one. Again, this is a long-lived immunity, so for the whole laying cycle. However, I often will say that the long immunity needs a good foundation. So if you think about when you're building a house, if you don't have that concrete foundation from the live vaccines, you can build a house on there, but it's not going to last as long. Okay, so you need to give the live vaccines appropriately to get the benefit of the killed vaccine. So that's the second tip. Build a good foundation of live vaccines to maintain immunity. Oftentimes when I start to see titers at 45 or 50 weeks and they're not good, and I know those birds were injected, we start to talk about were they injected correctly or what was the live vaccine coverage like. For layers and breeders, you want to really focus on the live vaccines prior to the killed vaccine. And for meat birds, this may mean that you will need to boost in your barn somewhere between 10 to 14 days, often with either bronchitis or infectious bursal disease. So we're going to go through this graph here, and it's going to tell you all the different types of vaccines you can do and try. So this first little blip here, that is just one live vaccine. So this is your broilers. This is your pullets when you first get them. You get a little bit of immunity, but it's short-lived. So then you get 4 times live vaccines. So now we're thinking about some of those layer or some of those pullet barns where they don't inject. And here, if you time it correctly, you can build on those blips so you get higher immunity each time, but it's still short-lived. So you can see here that it starts to decrease at about 16 weeks. Okay, so here the timing was important and having multiple live vaccines. This is a live plus 2 killed vaccine. This is pretty normal for broiler breeders, and that's a really high titer protection. Those big jumps, those are your killed vaccine after the live vaccines. Now, in frequent live vaccination, so what this means is you're not timing them correctly. So you haven't said, okay, we know that they last about 6 weeks and we want to vaccinate probably every 3 weeks to maintain that immunity. So here you're just going to see blips, but they're not building on each other and they're still short-lived. And then and then killed only. So you get a good response with killed, but it's not as good if you don't have a good foundation with live beforehand. And then this circle here, that's maternal antibodies. So maternal antibodies, you can see that there's no protection in those first 2 weeks because we often, well, maybe I'll go into maternal antibodies and we can talk about that. So maternal antibodies are when the breeder has been vaccinated and she now has antibodies in her, and those are passed down to the chick through the yolk. And as the chick absorbs the yolk, they start to get these antibodies. And so they're protected for like the first 2 to 3 weeks of their life. The better the protection of the hen or the better vaccinated the hen is, the better protected the chick is. High maternal antibodies, though, those can produce vaccine failure at hatch. So when you're vaccinating at the hatchery, which I recommend that you do, if you're still having disease challenges in your broiler barn or your turkey barn, later in the cycle, you may need to start thinking about when did they first receive the vaccine and do you need to boost it? If you decide not to vaccinate at the hatchery, which again is not what I recommend, it's important to not leave it too late so the chick is not left vulnerable. So an example of this would be bronchitis virus. So if you don't vaccinate pullets at the hatchery for bronchitis virus and you wait until 2.5 or 3 weeks, whatever your vaccine schedule says, if they get infected during that time before they're vaccinated, you could have a really bad outbreak of bronchitis later in the cycle. So the third tip is going to be handling the vaccine correctly. So remembering they're live organisms and you can kill them. I often get the phone call of, hey, my fridge went out over the weekend. Should I use the vaccine? I'm like, no, it's no good anymore. These vaccines require 2 to 7 degrees Celsius and they need to stay away from sunlight. So you want to think about that for transportation, then storage on your farm, and when you're administering it. And we'll go into detail about that. But that's what we call the cold chain live vaccine management. So if you see here, we have 2 photos of a fridge from Pete. If you guys know Pete from Spring Coulee, he has a vaccine specific fridge. The vaccine is in the fridge. It's not on the door. So it's a more controlled environment and there's nothing else in that fridge. You can use a temperature gun when you're getting your vaccine transported to you or when you want to check it in the fridge. Along with the fridge, you'll see here that we have a max min thermometer. So you should be checking your max and min every day of your fridge with your vaccine, recording it. And then also if you can put an alarm in your fridge to let you know if it's getting too cold or too hot, because that's a lot of vaccine and a lot of money to lose. When you make your stock solution, whether you're putting it through the water, if it's possible, or through spray, you want to keep that water at 2 to 6 degrees Celsius or as close to the fridge temperature as you can, because the more you deviate from that, the quicker your vaccine is going to die. Okay, looking at a few of you in this room, beer fridges are not for vaccine. So if I come to your farm and I see there's vaccine in your beer fridge, I'm going to take all your beer. You should have a vaccine specific fridge and there should be a lock on it so that people don't come and go. This should be in the barn. It shouldn't be in the kitchen. And you could have a sign in and sign out for it. So no beer fridge. You can get 2 fridges and make sure you have a vaccine specific fridge. This will save you a lot of money, either in undergrades, in condemns, or in ruined vaccine. Now, we've gone through the cold chain handling for live vaccine, but now we need to talk about killed vaccine. And when you're handling this, you keep it in the fridge similar to the live vaccine until you're going to use it. And then you bring it out a few hours before and you put it in a warm water bath at about 16 to 27 degrees Celsius before you inject it. If you inject that vaccine and it's cold into the birds, you're going to call me and you're going to be mad because they don't do well after the vaccine because it hurts them. They don't feel good. Okay. It's a tough vaccine. If when we get injected with vaccines, it hurts. It's the same with the birds. So you want to bring that up to room temperature to make it easier on the bird and to make any negative consequences less. Then you want to maintain the best hygiene during vaccination. So this photo here of the pails, these were the pails that were being used for a vaccine during a vaccine audit on farm. Those are not appropriate. You need to have clean material because you're spraying these birds in the face or they're drinking this water. So you don't want to be infecting them with something while you're vaccinating them. You need to have bacteria-free water and dedicated clean equipment, which means that you have equipment specific to vaccinating. So if you have a stock solution on your broiler farm, a 20-gallon pail cannot be the same pail that you just used for medication, or it cannot be the same pail that you just used for mixing up a disinfectant. It has to be a specific vaccine equipment. And if you're going to clean that equipment, you try to only clean it with water because you don't want any leftover residue of disinfectants or soaps or anything like that. You want to maintain optimal water quality during vaccination. If your water is not clean during vaccination, your vaccination will not be as good. Your birds will not respond as well. And again, then it's wasted money on your front. You want the water to be free of sanitizers because sanitizers, their job is to kill anything in the water that's not supposed to be there. So they will kill your vaccine. And medication can also kill your vaccine during vaccination. So you want to turn these off. The drug companies, I believe, say 72 hours prior. If your water is really, really, really bad, I'm sure you could go 48 hours. But that's something you need to talk about with your vet team or your field service team. You want a neutral pH. And again, if you can get it to 2 to 7 degrees Celsius. Now, one really common error that I've been seeing is that using the wrong neutralizer tablets for your water. So if you're using VacSafe or Vac Plus, you want to make sure that those are specific to your type of disinfectant. So if you're like, one will be for peroxide and one will be for chlorine dioxide. So making sure you're using the right one. This is a really good time to do a shameless plug for the water quality app through Poultry Innovations Partners. I just think Brenda's so happy. I think this is like the best tool that we could have gotten. And the idea that it's free for producers. So you can just go to www.pippoultrywaterapp.com and talk to your board, and they will give you a password so you can use that for free. And it'll ask you questions about your water and you answer them that specific to your water, and it comes up with a solution and information about your water specifically. So it's really helpful. Okay, so we're halfway through our tips. So now it's going to be take time to prepare your vaccine solution correctly. So you're going to want to calculate how much water you need. If you're going through the drinking water, you want the birds to drink this vaccine water in 1 to 2 hours. Where if you're vaccinating the birds through spraying, you want it to take 1 hour or less. You want to ensure that there's a dye in the vaccine stock solution. So if we go back to those VacSafe tabs or the Backpack Plus, they have dyes, they have blue dyes. So you can start making sure that either the birds are drinking it, or you can see that you're actually spraying the birds, not just spraying the cage. For drinking water, you want to empty the lines and charge it with the vaccine, and you can make sure it is charged with the vaccine by checking for the blue water at the end of the line. And if possible, don't use a dosatron or filters. Use a medicating bulk tank if possible, if you're going through the water. Wear gloves. So if you have soap on your hands, if you have lotion on your hands, if you have perfume on your hands, that's going to help deactivate your vaccine quicker. Okay, so just wear, but the catch to this, I caught this one time on farm, it needs to be rubber gloves and they need to be like not used before. Okay, so if there's holes in your rubber gloves, don't use those, use new ones. Now, when you're mixing the vaccine, you want to remove the rubber stopper and fill the vial halfway with the stock solution, and then you just gently invert it. If you shake it really hard, you could hurt your vaccine if it's something like a bronchitis vaccine. So you want to be inverting it gently, and then pour and rinse it into your stock solution. Make sure there's no powder remaining in the bottom of that vial. And then one thing that I've learned in the last few years is rinsing the lid, because you can actually lose about 15% of your total vaccine in the lid of that vial. Now, when you're applying your spray vaccine, this is tip number 8. You want to do a practice run beforehand. And so what that means is just putting normal water into your sprayer, normal clean water, and walk either down your broiler barn, down your breeder barn, or down free run, aviary with cages, whatever works for you. But you want to know how long it's going to take you to do your whole barn, and you want to know how much water you need for spraying. So I often get a phone call saying, hey, I'm about to vaccinate 50,000 birds. How much water do I need? But you need to figure that out because you have a different sprayer and you have a different pressure and you have a different size of barn. So it's really up to you to do that practice run and figure that out. Once you do that, you want to keep in mind the correct gauge, so over 100 microns, and then the correct pressure, so 65 to 75 PSI. If it's possible, when you're spraying, turn the fans off. Now, if this is not possible, if it's hot or if you have cage systems and you don't have a way of monitoring the top cages, don't do this. I don't want you losing birds. You can modify your vaccination plan as needed to account for it being too hot, but you don't want to kill birds just to vaccinate them. And then you want to reduce the lighting. I'm not a big fan of turning off the lights because I think that when you're spraying the birds, then they look a bit sleepy. But these are things that you can do individually for your barn to see what works best for you. So if you're spraying day-old birds in boxes, aviaries, or floor-raised birds, you want to spray about 30 to 40 centimeters above the birds, and you want to make sure they're all covered. So again, that's where that dye is going to come in and help. And then you want to let them dry for about 15 minutes. If birds are in the cages, you want to hold the sprayer about 20 centimeters from the cage. And you want to make sure you're spraying the birds. And I know that that sounds silly, but a lot of the times when I go do a vaccine audit in a layer facility in the cages, if we put a construction paper at the back of the cage and we do that spray, oftentimes it's not making it to the back of the cage at all because it's hitting the or like the frame of the cage instead. So you're missing a lot of your vaccine there. Now, if you're giving a killed vaccine, you want to pick the location for the needle to enter. If it's your first time doing this, I recommend the breast muscle, and talking with your field service staff or your vet or whoever you know that knows this well to make sure that you get the right location. You want to use the correct needle size. If your needle's too short, you can have a massive vaccine reaction from it just going under the skin, but not into the breast muscle. And if the needle's too long, there's potentially you go through and hit the liver and kill birds. Okay, so make sure you have the right needle size. Using clean and sharp needles. If you cause a vaccine reaction with either a dull or a dirty needle, those birds may not go into production. So it's worth putting in the money for using new needles and making sure they're clean. And then you want to make sure that your injection gun gives the correct dose. So if you get a bottle for 1,000 birds to inject, have an idea of how many 1,000 birds looks like, because you don't want to be vaccinating 2,000 birds and you don't want to be vaccinating 500 birds with that bottle. Okay, so making sure that you're keeping track of if you're actually giving the right number of doses. Number 9 is then you have to evaluate yourself and evaluate the schedule. So this is where a vaccination audit is really helpful. There's a lot of people in this room. I know Felipe is here and Adam is here. They're pharmaceutical reps from Merck and BI. They're amazing for doing vaccination audits. You can also have your field service staff come out, your hatchery staff come out, your vet team come out. It's a lot of people that are happy to do vaccination audits. And even if you think you have everything really down packed, just having somebody go through with fresh eyes really helps. You want to check the live vaccine take. So this is why we will dye the stock solution so you can check their tongues. Okay, so their tongues should all be blue at the end of the vaccine. And you could check maybe 10 to 15 birds per row if they're in cages, or if you're just checking on the floor, check 50 birds, whatever you're comfortable with, to make sure it's representative of your flock sample. You can take blood tests to check your antibody titers. This is going to tell you, and we're going to go through how to read these, but this is going to tell you the bird's immune response to the vaccine. So if they're all 0, that means that they didn't see the vaccine. You didn't vaccinate them correctly. Okay, so that's a good starting indicator of how well you did. And then you want to review flock performance with your team at the end of the cycle. So whether these are broilers and you had really high condemns, or these are turkeys that have high breast blisters and E. coli, or broiler breeders that maybe didn't have the right, or even layers that don't have the right production, or just really bad eggs, you need to figure out what worked in that cycle and what do you want to change. If you're worried about your undergrades, you're worried about your cellulitis, are there vaccines that can be brought into that along with management changes to help with that? We're going to talk about how to review titers really quickly. So titers here, so the number on the bottom of the graph, that's your titer groups, okay? So 0 means there's no titers, which means they have not ever seen the vaccine, or they haven't recently seen the vaccine, and they haven't seen the virus in the field. That's what 0 is. Now 18 means there's something really hot there, and it's probably a disease, but it could just be sometimes some of you guys are so good at vaccinating that you do actually get really high titers like that, okay? Ideally, we want to see them somewhere in the middle of that titer group, so like this group. Now, the number of samples on the side, that's the number of birds what that blood samples were taken from, okay? So for here, for titer group 5, there's like 3 birds that got titer group 5. And for titer group 6, there's 4 birds that got titer group 6. So that's how that works. There'll be numbers on the side of the graph when you get them. And I didn't put them in the charts because there's a lot to go through and it's more helpful if you have somebody go through it with you individually. But the 2 numbers that I look at are your G mean and your CV. And your G mean is basically your average titer response. So for this graph, it would be about 7. Your CV is how much, you guys will know CV from the layer world, is how tight those vaccines are together. The lower the CV, the better, unless they're all 0. That's not good. So for here, we start to look and we'll say, okay, the titer G mean is around 7 and the CV is under 50. That's good. Okay, under 50%. So this is a bad vaccination. So this was 3 weeks after the birds were vaccinated. Most of the birds were 0. 1 bird had a titer group of 1 and 1 group had a titer group of 2. Okay, this is when we would do a vaccine audit because something didn't work here. This is also a poor vaccination in the sense that the CV is wide. Okay, so every bird experienced something different here. If they were in cages, it's possible that the top cages received less vaccine than the bottom cages, or vice versa. Every bird is technically protected here, but the numbers 1 and 2 are not overly protected. And they're so spread out that I would do another boost here to try and get birds all on the same page. And then this is a good vaccination. So again, we've got the tighter bars closely together, right? So 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And all of those birds fall into that number, and every bird is well protected. The 10th tip is to know the disease challenges in your area. So I often have discussions with broiler producers and turkey producers about vaccinations and the idea of vaccinating on farm, if that's even an option. Well, for turkeys, right now, HE virus seems to be growing a lot more. We're seeing it more in some of the farms. So that's worth talking to your veterinarian about, or your field staff about. E. coli is another one where we have some producers starting to vaccinate E. coli either at the hatchery or on farm. And they seem to be really liking that. For chickens, you can vaccinate for E. coli or salmonella again, but the more common ones would be infectious bronchitis virus or infectious bursal disease. But this is going to really depend on conversations you have with your hatchery about what they're using at the hatchery and what they recommend. And then also what your cycle results have been like. Okay, so we're going to go through those again because Smiley Mike just got here last minute. So the first one, you want to know what you're working with. So know your bird health status and your vaccine and what previous cycles have been doing. You want to build a good foundation of live vaccines to maintain immunity, or you're just not going to get your money's worth. Handle the vaccine correctly. Again, you won't get your money's worth if you don't handle your vaccine correctly. Maintain the best hygiene during vaccination. You don't want to make your birds sick while you're vaccinating them. Maintain optimal water quality during vaccination. Again, if your water quality isn't good, your vaccination uptake and your vaccination efficacy will not be as good. Take time to prepare your live vaccine stock solution correctly. This is where it goes wrong about 90% of the time. Mix your vaccine the right way. Apply your vaccine correctly. And then evaluate your application and the schedule. And know the disease challenges in your area. And with that, there was a lot of people that helped with this presentation. So thank you to everyone that helped. And if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Oh yes, Teryn, there are questions.
Let's get underway with does PLV loan out poultry specific sprayers that have been calibrated for droplet size?
No. I don't. No, we don't. That would be a biosecurity risk. If you guys are worried about like your droplet size and your sprayers, we can put you in touch with pharmaceutical reps and you can talk to them specifically. And often they have a sprayer that you can use.
I'll stand on my tiptoes. Eggs coming from the States. Are breeders in the States vaccinating same as in Canada?
No. I can't speak to that. I don't work within the hatcheries to speak to that. I don't work with imports either, so I can't say that, but I would say no.
Yeah. Okay. What about